This is a long form video, people, so settle in, get yourself a cup of tea and rest up and listen up. Global warming, net zero, climate change, is it all a scam? Well, I wouldn't say it's totally a scam, but a lot of the facts and figures that you're being fed, a lot of the information that you're being told, a lot of the scaremongering that is being forced your way is a scam. And actually, when you start to delve into it, it simply isn't true. So I'm going to go through a whole host of information in this video. I'm going to try and go through it sort of relatively slowly so you can understand it, so you can get your head around it. But it is relatively long form. So be prepared to sit in, to listen, to pay attention. I will put up some charts and bits and pieces as well that you can have a look at. And here we go. Glasses on because I need to be able to read this. So you have something called the IPCC. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the panel that is basically the biggest proponent of climate change, the research panel that does all the investigations and on which most countries base their policy. So 46 leading scientists have left the IPCC due to what they describe as the corruption of science within the organisation. I'm going to read you out some quotes just from sort of 10 to 15 of these scientists that have left, just to give you their comments as to what they feel about what's being said. So Dr. Robert Baling of the IPCC notes that no significant acceleration in the rate of sea level rise during the 20th century has been detected. But this did not appear in the IPCC summary for policymakers. Dr. Lucy Bagata: rising levels of airborne carbon dioxide don't cause global temperatures to rise. Temperature changes first, and then some 700 years later is followed by a change in the content of carbon dioxide. Dr. John Christie: little known to the public is the fact that most of the scientists involved in the IPCC do not agree that global warming is occurring. Its findings have been consistently misrepresented and or politicised with each succeeding report. Dr. Rosa Cambanucci: humans have only contributed a few tenths of a degree to warming on Earth. Solar activity is the key driver of climate change. Dr. Richard Courtney: the empirical evidence strongly indicates that the anthropogenic global warming hypothesis is just wrong. Dr. Judith Curry: I'm not going to just spout off and endorse the IPCC, but I don't have any confidence in the process. Dr. Robert Davis: global temperatures have not been changing as state-of-the-art climate models predicted they would. Not a single mention of satellite temperature observations appears in the IPCC summary. Dr. William DeLange: in 1996, the IPCC listed me as one of 3,000 scientists who agreed there was a human influence on climate. I didn't agree. There is no evidence to support this hypothesis. Dr. Christopher Freitas: government decision makers should have heard by now that the basis for the long-standing claim that carbon dioxide is a major driver of global climate change is being questioned, along with the hitherto assumed need for costly measures to restrict these emissions. If they've not heard, it's because of the din of global warming hysteria that relies on the logical fallacy of argument from ignorance. Dr. Peter Dietz: using a flawed eddy diffusion model, the IPCC has grossly underestimated oceanic carbon dioxide uptake. I can keep going, I'll just do a couple more. Dr. John Everett again: it's time for a reality check. The oceans and coastal zones have been far warmer and colder than is projected in the present scenarios of climate change. I've reviewed the IPCC and more recent scientific literature and believe there is not a problem with increased acidification. Final one. Dr. Lee Gerhard: I never fully accepted or denied the anthropogenic global warming concept until the furore started after NASA's James Hansen's wild claims in the late 1980s. I went to the scientific literature to study the basis of these claims, starting with first principles, and my studies led me to believe that the claims were completely false. So it seems that's just 15 or 16 people, 46 leading scientists have left the IPCC and made very similar claims. They don't believe it. They say the research at best is being fudged, and what we're being told is simply not true. We're only giving a very small edited version. So here's some more facts. Were you aware, for example, that in the year just finished, the year 2025, global temperatures dropped? The last year just gone was actually cooler than it was the year before. How does that work then? Because CO2 and emissions have continued to go up. So why would you have a year that's cooler than it was the year before? Does that make any sense? I'm just going to pop up this little chart as well, which is to do with the amount of the amount of disasters of different types that have occurred over the course of the last sort of 50 years or so. Just have a look at this chart. It's quite difficult to see easily, but what it shows you is that we are constantly told that the change in the climate and that CO2 and rising temperatures is causing major weather disasters, more floods, more heat, more forest fires, more droughts, more extreme cold, more rain, etc., etc. But the evidence in terms of the actual amount of disasters that are happening just doesn't mount up. There is no evidence. Global climate-related disasters are not increasing. In fact, 2025 clocked in as the lowest year in the past 25 years for these events, according to EMDAT database. They're saying that there was only one reported extreme temperature event globally for the entire year. One, globally. From 2000 to 2025, we've seen emissions skyrocketing, and temperatures have hit some record highs in a few years, according to the alarmists. Yet the number of reported disasters such as droughts, extreme temperatures, floods, storms, wildfires hasn't gone up. It's fluctuated. Some years been higher, some years been lower, but it's not an ever-rising chart of these disasters as we're being told. There were some peaks in the early 2000s and mid-2010s with dips in between, and now 2025 is at the very bottom level for that entire period. That doesn't make sense. It should just be continuing to go up. Remember all of the headlines we keep getting told. Climate change is fueling monster hurricanes, heat waves of a new normal. Billions of people at risk, wildfires raging because of your carbon footprint. Billions are being poured into green schemes, economies upended and kids terrified in schools for a narrative that actually just isn't happening. What's even worse is that not only are we being told these things, but we're being sold measures to prevent these things from happening. So, for example, UK scientists and the UK government have signed off on a potential scheme to try and dim the sun. Effectively, they are going to seed the clouds, pump chemicals into the atmosphere to create more clouds to block the sun to prevent heat. Really? What could possibly go wrong? Blocking the sun, the very source of our existence, the very source of our plant life, the source of warmth all around the planet, and they want to try and block it. They want to try and modify the weather to such an extent that it lowers global temperatures. Do you think that's sensible? Do you think that makes sense? In fact, if you think about it, the whole concept of global average temperatures doesn't really make sense. They take these temperatures from weather stations and from temperature monitors that are mounted 2 meters above ground from all over the world. But you've got such extremes of weather all over the world anyway, and you always have. So in the Arctic, for example, it might be minus 40 degrees, whilst at the same time in a desert somewhere, it could be 115 degrees Fahrenheit. You're taking those temperatures at different times of the year from different areas of the world when, by the very dint of nature, you're going to get different weather each year. You get things like the El Nino effect, which is to do with sea currents, which completely changes temperature and weather patterns every 5 years. And they're well aware of that. So that's going to create different average temperatures. Far better would be to take, or most people believe the better way to take it would be to take sea temperatures, an average in sea temperatures. And the average sea temperatures have risen, but they've risen far, far, far more slowly and far less than temperatures of the atmosphere which they're taking. You also have to look at the arguments around the actual effect that these things are having on the planet. So here are some statistics about life expectancy across the various continents. So this takes the difference between life expectancy in 1925, or in some cases earlier, to now. So in Africa, life expectancy between 1925 to the 2010-2020 period rose 131%. In the Americas, over a similar period, slightly longer period, 116%. In Asia, again over a slightly longer period, 165%. In Europe, again slightly longer period, 115%. And in Oceania, in the Southern Oceans, again 125%. So on average, life expectancy has more than doubled over the course of the last century or so. Why is that? Well, because it's to do with many of the developments in the modern world, whether that's clean water and irrigation, production of food, medical care, sanitation, etc., etc. And many of those developments are reliant on what? Things like electricity, things like heating, things like technology, all of which are a result of the use of fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels that we're trying to do away with, the fossil fuels that apparently are now killing the planet, have been the biggest benefit for mankind in terms of life expectancy, in terms of standard of living, in terms of eradication of poverty, of anything that's ever happened throughout human history. But now we want to do away with those and replace them with something which is far more expensive and less reliable. Again, does that make sense? We're also constantly told that climate change, global warming, is going to lead to starvation, to food rationing, to food scarcity. But is that true? Well, it appears not to be, because all the records show that over the course of the last 20 to 25 years, there's been a major level of regreening of the planet due to the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that regreening has led to huge growths in the amount of agriculture that's going on. When you put that alongside developments around genetically modified crops, which I don't personally agree with, but which is happening, and also around advanced techniques for growing food, then the amount of agricultural and crop yields that is now going on compared to previously is huge. Now, of course, we've got a much larger global population, but let me just give you some of these rises. So the growth in wheat production around the world from the 1960s to 1970 up until recent times has gone up 2,481%. Maize also 2,400%, rice 2,000%, soybeans 1,960%, bananas 1,821%. Peas 1,650%, beans 1,480%, potatoes 1,480%. I could go on. These are all down to advances in technology, advances in modern methods of agriculture, and also, yes, in extra CO2 in the atmosphere. The extra CO2 in the atmosphere is the main factor of life around greenery, around vegetation, and around agriculture and around crops. So increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, whilst it might potentially have some downsides, also has plus sides. But we never get told about those. We never get spoken to about those. We never get told that if CO2 was to go down dramatically from where it is now, crops would start to fail. That really would lead to food scarcity. That really would lead to starvation. And with regard to starvation, the number of people globally now dying from famine now compared to the year 1940, is down by 98%. It's very nearly halved in, 85 years. Let's also consider deaths that are caused or occur due to things like extreme temperatures and extreme weather. Are you aware, for example, that extreme cold kills nearly double the amount of people that exposure to extreme heat does? And that the number of people dying from exposure to extreme heat has been falling over recent years, as has the number of people with exposure to extreme cold. Again, that's down to modern technology, that's down to better housing conditions, less poverty, and largely down to electricity, heating, gas, and regulation of temperatures with people's homes and living conditions. People are simply not dying from extreme weather conditions the way they were previously. Yet you're led to believe that the world is on the brink of catastrophe, that millions are going to starve, that there's going to be drought that's going to kill millions of people. It's simply not happening. All the figures show that deaths because of those sorts of incidences are literally falling. We're also constantly told that the ice caps are going to melt, that the Arctic is thawing out, that polar bears are going to die off, and that the amount of ice that's going to be melting and dropping into the sea is going to raise sea levels catastrophically. Let's look at some of those again as well. So a very recent study that was published, that I read it literally in the last couple of weeks, shows that although Arctic ice levels overall have fallen to some extent, polar bear populations are thriving. They've managed to work their way around it, they've adapted, and they're not falling, they're not starving to death. They're not losing their habitat, they're just adapting to a slightly new habitat. That's in the Arctic. But let's look at the Antarctic, and let's look at the Antarctic right now. So Antarctica currently is in what they would describe as their peak summer, and it's just set an absolute record for the level of cold temperatures. So on February the 2nd, 2026, it was recorded of a temperature of minus 49.8 degrees C. That's an exceptionally low reading for early February, when temperatures are normally at their annual high point. In fact, it's a record low for the time of year, dating all the way back to 1957. Antarctic sea ice extent is now tracking well above 1979 averages and is growing even further. It's midsummer at the bottom of the world, yet there's record cold levels and record levels of ice. How does that play into the narrative we're being told about the planet superheating, about the ice melting, about so much ice falling into the sea that sea levels are going to rise dramatically? It just doesn't fit. What we're being told and the actual scientific facts do not match up.
What percentage of global carbon emissions is Britain responsible for?
Historically or in present
Currently.
terms? About 1%?
About 1%. 1%. So if we reduce our carbon emissions to zero and destroy our economy even more than we already have, we will reduce global carbon emissions by 1%. That's what we're talking about. Now, that's what we're talking about, right? And the promise of net zero was, well, it doesn't matter that it's 1% because Britain is a global leader. We will inspire the world if we destroy our industry and hand it over to China, who's going to make the same things that we still need but dirtier, and then we ship them back here on ships that use the dirtiest fuel imaginable. If we do that, the Chinese will be inspired to commit industrial suicide as well. The Chinese clearly are not as stupid as our leaders, so they haven't committed industrial suicide. That is what net zero has done. We have the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world. That means we basically cannot make anything in this country anymore. And we will not be able to make anything in this country anymore until we let go of this ridiculous idea that we will inspire other people to jump off a cliff like lemmings because we did. It doesn't work. It's not going to deliver prosperity. And James talks about we need a strong economy and we need net zero. Those two things are incompatible. You can't have both. So either you choose to make your people prosperous, or you choose to pursue it. If that's not what you said, then forgive me. I thought what you said is we need both of those things, and I'm saying we can't have both of those things. We're going to have to abandon completely the idea of net zero. We can definitely continue to invest in new technology, and we should be pursuing newer, cleaner, cheaper forms of energy. But the number one priority of government policy going forward should be to deliver the cheapest possible, reliable, abundant energy that we can, so that A, our industry can thrive, and B, so that you are not paying ridiculous electricity and gas prices, because we have some of the highest energy prices for consumers in the world as well. Net zero is industrial suicide, and we've been committing it for far too long, and it has to end.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure that many scientists can and will refute much of our statistics that I've just quoted. I'm sure that many people on the IPCC would say, no, that's a load of rubbish. The people that have left are just disgruntled ex-members. I'm sure that they would put up reasons as to why the Antarctic is just having a bit of a cold spell this year and why the ice levels down there are growing. I'm sure they would put up reasons as to why the polar bear population is thriving. I'm sure they would say, actually, drought, wildfires, etc. are increasing. But the real life statistics do not bear that out. What you are being told, what we are being told, doesn't necessarily stack up. And the problem with all of that is that all of our lives are being changed as a result of that. Our costs are going through the roof, particularly in countries like the UK. We now have the highest industrial electricity and energy costs anywhere in the industrialised world. Our consumer electricity and gas costs are some of the highest in the world. You all know your bills have literally gone through the roof. The cost of food has gone through the roof. Why is that when food production seems to be at highest levels it has been in many, many years? We are being told that we're going to have to continue to put subsidies into green energy for the next 20, 25 years to make it sustainable, at the very same time that we're closing down and shutting down all of our completely abundant oil fields in the North Sea. Britain produces, and this was on Question Time last week when the Labour government minister Douglas Alexander admitted it, Britain produces 1% of global climate emissions. Konstantin Kishin made the point to him, well, if we completely managed to go net zero tomorrow, which is impossible, by the way, but even if we were able to do it tomorrow, what you're saying is we would reduce global emissions by 1%. Yes, said the minister. How much are global emissions rising by each year through the output, which is increasing in countries like China, India, and many of the other growing industrialized nations? Guess what? It's a lot more than 1%. So we could effectively completely impoverish our nation, put your bills through the roof, shut down any industrial production, shut down any manufacturing whatsoever that we have in this country, and the planet would still get higher net emissions than it does now. What we are doing makes zero difference, none whatsoever. All we're simply doing is exporting our emissions to other countries. It's insane. It makes no sense. It cannot work. The only effect it's going to have is turn us back to a pre-industrial nation. We will not be able to afford to make anything. We're already losing all of our capability for steel production, but that's going to extend to every other heavy industry. We won't be making machinery. We won't be producing energy. We won't be a manufacturing country of any description whatsoever. Is that the future you want? Particularly when it benefits the planet that much. Nothing whatsoever. No change. Zilch. Zero benefit for any of you. The climate change, global warming, net zero agenda is a scam, in my opinion. Do your own research.